The Syntax of Things by Arisha. Chapter 40. To be a Fool. A Note Unsaid. Harry spun around in midair. Zacharias Smith gave a neat pass to Demelza, and Ginny angrily swore behind him. Harry set off around the pitch for the fourth time already, scanning the skies for some sign of the golden snitch. There was no sign of it. Ron shouted to McLaggen to move aside, and suddenly the quaffle was in Ginny's possession again. "Summerby got the snitch! Hufflepuff wins!" the commentator shouted, and half the crowd cheered and clapped. Harry looked at Summerby, a bit lost. The snitch was tightly clutched in his upraised hand. They landed on the pitch, and Harry kicked at the ground, tossing his broom aside. Summerby landed elegantly after a few moments, and a group of younger Hufflepuff students came to hug him. A blonde girl who couldn't be older than 13 touched the snitch and shrieked in excitement. "Where is the captain?" McGonagall asked as she came closer, her shoulders squared and her chin high. "Professor," panted Ron as he pulled off his helmet. "You did great," she told him proudly. "But we lost!" Ron exclaimed. "Second time in a row!" He dared a quick glance at Harry, most likely blaming him for the match's outcome. "Winning is not important. Playing fairly is," McGonagall said. "For training hard and for having enjoyed the game, I will give 15 points to Gryffindor." Harry watched her dumbfounded, and she didn't forget to give Harry a nod of approval, too. "Well done, Potter," she said sternly as she walked past him to talk to Hooch. Hermione ran to Harry and hugged him tightly. Harry couldn't help but think that she'd love for Ron to see that. He felt a little used, but he made a mental note to simply tease her about it later. "It's a miracle you didn't end up in the hospital wing again," she said. "That quaffle was crazy." "You weren't concentrated," Luna added as she approached them. Her lion blinked at him and growled. "I could see you were lost in your own gloomy thoughts." More often than not, Harry did not know how to respond to Luna. He glanced up at the Slytherin seats, but didn't see Snape. Not many Slytherins cared to attend the matches they didn't participate in. "How could you even train as a team if he won't talk to you?" Hermione asked, her eyes darting between Harry and Ron, who was now kissing Lavender. "Wasn't that hard, although he forgot himself a couple of times," Harry added quickly. "Besides, we all know I'm a natural," he joked. "It was very kind of you that you offered to Ron to be captain in your place, Harry," Luna said in a round voice. "He needed it more than I did," he replied. Also, he and Ron were still friends back then. Promising he'd meet them again after showering, Harry headed off to the boys' bathroom. The hot water washed away the dirt and the mud, and he allowed himself to relax a little. Saying things out loud made them easier to accept. This Harry knew. Speaking of his worries or nightmares always made him feel better. Tonight, Harry allowed his disappointment about losing the match to tower over everything else that caused him anxiety and pain. A silly sentiment it was, being utterly heartbroken for letting down his team again. Still, part of him felt almost nice, almost excited for worrying about something that he could actually share easily. Something relatable. "I didn't catch the snitch, and I'm upset." It sounded so normal, Harry relished in it eagerly, experiencing a strange sense of belonging with each time he repeated the words in his head. There was darkness, aggressive darkness, and maybe even rage behind this. He felt jealous of his friends' privilege to share their issues unbothered, feeling no consequences at all. When Hermione liked Crumb, everyone knew it. No one cared. Ron could kiss Lavender whenever he wanted, and the professors barely took points anymore. Harry couldn't speak of his secret. Hermione would think that he'd lost his mind. A part of himself didn't want to share it at all. He wanted to keep it as his most private truth. But what is the truth if no one knows it? Does it still really exist? He was desperate, completely desperate for direction. Desperate for someone to lift the responsibility of deciding from his shoulders. Deciding what he was, what he wanted. A parent would be nice now. A mother for him to turn to and say, "I'm gay, I think," so he could then be accepted and tightly embraced. A father Harry could ask, "What did it feel like to you being my age?" so he could then be reassured that it would be all right. Cursing himself for being unable to think of anything else, he didn't notice the door behind him opening and closing. He had just finished getting dressed. Ron walked in and looked at Harry coldly. "I was just leaving," said Harry quickly. No, you don't have to. It's fine. I'm done. You're a good seeker." Harry stood still, not knowing what to say. He couldn't remember the last time they'd talked. "Thanks, Ron. You saw Smith? That bastard was carrying the quaffle under his arm for ages up there. Hooch was so mad. Harry hadn't noticed that. I thought Smith was one of their best. Ron sat on the bench and unzipped his bag to take out clean clothes. He's mental. I'd have beaten him up if he kept doing that. What was he telling Ginny? Harry asked. Ron rolled his eyes. He asked her if she was feeling tired. In the middle of the game. Can you even imagine approaching a player of the opposing team to ask that? Unsure, Harry sat on the bench too. Perhaps he likes her. Ron made a pause. Dunno. He pulled off his socks, but he didn't make any other movement. He stared ahead at the wall, and Harry, sitting beside him, felt the cold silence growing again. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. The torches nailed on the four corners of the room emitted weak, flickering flames that barely illuminated the large space. 4. 5. Smudged shoe prints made of watery muck covered the cracked floor tiles. A rusty faucet at the far end of the bathroom was monotonously dripping water into a plastic bucket. 6. 7. 8. 9. I just don't get it, Harry. And Harry realized they weren't talking about Quidditch anymore. I warned you, and you broke her heart. Harry released his breath. I know, he admitted, the shame burning his face once again. I'm sorry. No, you're not. I love Ginny, he pressed. I never wanted to hurt her. I didn't know what to believe about myself. I was confused, scared shitless, I swear. I hoped that being with her would drive this thing away. Why didn't it? Ron asked. He wasn't exactly angry anymore, but his voice was cold and bitter. Harry wondered if this was the only chance he'd ever have to fix things. Why did you choose this instead of everything else? Why choose this over me, over her? What the hell happened to you? Harry had never chosen this. Still, all his arguments melted under the possibility of Ron being absolutely right. I don't know. I haven't changed. This is hard for me too, you know. I'm not doing it on purpose. Ron closed his eyes and blurted out his next words fast. Have you ever thought of me in that way? Because all these years, all these times you've seen me naked for moments, like all these times, my brothers even never, Harry said louder than intended. You've been my best friend for the past 6 years. I think you would have figured it out by now if I fancied you. My brothers? No, Ron. Ron shook his head. If I'd known this, You would have stayed away? Asked Harry. Ron said nothing. He simply pressed his lips together. I have never thought of you that way, Harry repeated again steadily. Not of you. Not of your brothers. Not of your dad. What the fuck would you even mention my dad now? Ron rubbed his face, his shoulders suddenly tensing. Harry realized that, not too surprisingly, he'd said the wrong thing again. What the hell is wrong with you? Ron muttered into his hands. What I'm trying to say is that you're into my dad. Harry glared. I just said the exact opposite. How could you do that to Ginny? I don't know, Harry whispered. You felt nothing for her. I did, Harry said. I do, but not like that, as it turned out. Because you like men. Harry shook his head in a sort of way. It was the truth, so why was he so afraid to admit it? I don't know, he said again instead. Are you planning on becoming a woman or anything gross? Ron asked. No, Ron, Harry said defeatedly. Ron nodded. I'll need to think about this, he admitted, and Harry was more than stunned to realize that there may still be hope for their friendship. He couldn't help but feel like he had betrayed Ron by being like this. That night, Harry was not so eager to descend to the dungeons. Running the risk of being late for his occlumency lesson, however, he forced himself to go. His way was blocked by a group of girls by the dormitory door. One of them thrust a red box into his hands. Chocolate cauldrons, the girl said. They got fire whiskey in them. My grand sent them to me, but I don't really like them. Oh, thanks, I guess, he said. Severus tried not to notice Potter staring up at him, eyes carefully darting between his text, the floor, and Severus. He mentally prepared himself for another silent staring torture caused by this boy as he moved on to the next demonstration of wand movement, and the students repeated after him. Very recently, the boy's insolence had stopped following him to class. Severus didn't know whether or not he should feel thankful for being granted the illusion of still having what little power he could over Potter. There had to be an answer hiding somewhere near, but it wasn't obvious. His position in this school had been long ago attacked, and it wasn't Potter who had completely broken it, but his own idiocy and unrealistic optimism. Why did he think that Potter could keep this up? The green eyes peering at him during class would not be as unwelcome if they didn't demand an acknowledgement, which would only weaken Severus's resistance in this madness. Vivid though Potter's emotional breakdown was, Severus had promised himself to turn a blind eye to it until there was no way around it anymore. He regarded his assistance precious, and thus he was not going to offer it unless asked. Politely. Shutting doors and hiding was futile. Melting away and disappearing into a tiny puddle of nothingness was most likely futile too. The boy was tenacious. Well pleased that the public displays of rage and mockery had ceased, however, the only thing that was left for Severus to get rid of was the private expressions of emotion and the primitive instincts that came with it. For his part, instincts like murder. For the boy's part, well, he decided to stall that particular train of thought just as Potter's eyes fell back to his textbook. It wasn't theatrics, not exactly. It was hypocrisy. The very act Potter always accused him of. That and cruelty, of course. Consoling himself that being nasty to his students was only natural, failed to reassure the grip that painfully squeezed his stomach. If Potter couldn't handle cruelty, he could just walk away. Should just walk away. But why complain about what couldn't be fixed? Lily and James Potter's son had a crush on him. End of story. He could cry on Dumbledore's shoulder and beg for Minerva's intervention if he fancied, blaming them for not keeping the golden boy at a safe distance from his life, and for letting the little brat bedraggle him. He could do all that. Facts, however, were not going to change. And as for his self-resentment regarding Potter's presence in his class, his chambers, his thoughts, he had nothing to apologize for. He had every right to hate himself when it came to that boy, however bizarre that may be. Once, Severus had made a promise to himself to never be around James Potter's son if it could be helped. And yet the boy had defied his untold wish for peace and solitude, and had planted himself right in the middle of Severus's life with unprecedented ease. A desperate need for composure besieged him as he was reminded of the balance he had to maintain. Dealing with feelings that were not his own was something Severus had never been asked to do, and for a beginner, he had to admit that his performance was phenomenal. He was helping Potter. He was training him, teaching him, keeping him from committing suicide and a sudden nervous collapse during his insomniac nights. Severus had done nothing wrong. Silenced, Severus warned as a generic murmur had begun between the students. Those who have finished may leave. He drawled, impatient for the class to end. He was quite certain that Potter did not have the faintest idea of what he was doing to him. He mentally composed a speech filled with hatred directed straight to Potter and his silly dreams, although he knew he'd never deliver it. I hate you, he began, the new mantra soothing his nerves down. I wholeheartedly hate you. Severus damned himself for having a good side. Treating the boy well was an unexpected twist for which he had to often apologize to his mirror at night. Giving him what he had hoped to find, offering him an extension of their obligatory cohabitation, was an unforgivable mistake he could not see how to correct. A twisted part of his mind was becoming anxious when the time was coming for Potter to visit, and he wished himself damnation for daring to be happy in this renewed version of not minding that what he was doing was dangerous. Forbidden. Oh, fuck off. Slughorn had been inviting over his students since Severus was a student himself. Severus didn't see why this was any different or suspicious. Traitorous, yes, it certainly was. His imaginary wiser self had outed the truth to Dumbledore countless times by now. In his dreams, Severus kneeled before the headmaster's feet and expressed his remorse, his guilt, his shame. But in his nightmares, the headmaster refused to listen. In his nightmares, Severus found no consolation, no tolerance. He was instead accused of leading on and having taken advantage of a confused, irrational child. Every night in every nightmare, Severus pictured his confession to be humble and honest. He also pictured his punishment to be condemning. in real life. He was still managing to lie to Dumbledore successfully without even flinching, so he packed away his regret for his slip of character with a promise to release it again later. What for, he couldn't tell. If only madmen were as sane as Potter, even in his current collapsing state. His emotional attachment to Severus was a product of a reality he could not stand. The war, his being an orphan, the loss of his useless godfather, and a prophecy challenging his life were not enough to soothe his youthful desire for exploration. Severus was momentarily torn between applauding his strength of heart and pushing his limits until he eventually snapped. There were dark desires hiding behind those seemingly innocent green eyes, and pretending otherwise was dangerous. He reminded himself that he had privately assisted students before. Private lessons were not new to him. He had been doing this for the best part of the last 2 decades. Students had visited his office and his chambers numerous times. He'd talked to them, and he had helped them get through untold and often horrifying situations. They were all Slytherins, yes, but nevertheless, his students looked up to him and didn't need to be told twice that his door was always open to them. It wasn't any different because Potter belonged in another house.
Is this your best excuse? The little beast has already sexually attacked you twice.
Potter walked over to his desk and handed him a test for which he had studied last night while sitting next to him. Severus's heart stopped. The word inappropriate kicked him hard, and fortunately he didn't have the energy required to squirm. He nodded stupidly, and Potter left hurriedly to catch up with his friends. In complete silence for once. Severus was glad for not having to retort to another cheeky or stupid comment. They'd have all night for that. Severus vaguely regretted not having instantly believed him when the boy had foolishly opened his heart to him to justify what Severus chose to call "doesn't count as a kiss." A fitting name it was. If he had understood the importance of the information shared back in the summer, he'd have obviously stayed away. Obviously. But you knew. He didn't. He thought it was a phase. He decided to ignore it to spare himself the restless nights of terror and irony striking him back from a past long forgotten and lost in the abyss of mistakes impossible to undo. Lily wouldn't want this. Lily would hate to see him near her sweet son. Loath as he was to accept it, her sweet son had an entirely different opinion on the subject. Well, death was a note unsaid. Death was for the dead. Severus tried hard not to think whom life was for.